Tonight, we're going to start off talking about the big ships that move up and down the Columbia and Willamette rivers. And we'll talk about the safety steps that have, thankfully so far, kept ships from hitting our bridges. Bridges like the Astoria Bridge or the Lewis and Clark Bridge between Longview and Rainier. The safe movement of big ships in the Northwest. That is our big story tonight. Sometimes when something big like the Baltimore Bridge happens, we local news folks kind of start to wonder, gee whiz, I wonder if that could happen here. And the answer is yes, of course it could. But so far it has not, and that's thanks to careful behind the scenes work that you never hear about. We all love our rivers and our bridges, so tonight we'll show you how they're protected as the massive ships glide past and the sorts of things that are done to lower the chance that we'd have a disaster like Baltimore's. First, some background. Big ships cross the Columbia River Bar coming from or going to the Pacific Ocean about 10 times a day. They carry something like $24 billion worth of cargo in and out of Oregon each year. It's a delicate dance getting a ship into a dock, getting it loaded with something like grain, then moving it out to make room for the next ship. But it all happens all the time along our rivers. And every time a ship comes in from the ocean, it has to cross the bar and then carefully make its way under the big bridge in Astoria. And whenever that happens, a highly trained pilot from the Columbia Bar Pilots is at the helm steering the ship, and they've been there for a while. They actually go out and meet the ship several miles out at sea to make sure everything is in order. Dan Jordan, and one of those pilots.
So, we walk up onto the bridge of the ship, and generally, the first question with the captain is everything working? Are there any defects or deficiencies? And hopefully they always say no. But once in a while, there might be something, gyro error or, the minor things. Maybe wind speed gauge isn't working. So then we have to determine, is it an important item or not? If the radar is completely out, we won't bring it in unless we get permission through the Coast Guard. And certainly if there's engine problems or steering problems, it stays out. So we go through that process. That's called a master pilot exchange, which is an international term. In every port, you do a master pilot exchange of information. And it's them telling me about their ship, and then me telling them about our conditions in our transit, so that they know, is the current going in, current going out, what kind of traffic do we expect to encounter. So we do that part, and then that's accompanied by a document called a pilot card. And those, every ship has to have one. The details of the ship, but then the level of detail can vary anywhere from 1 page to 4 pages. Ideally, out in the ocean, we have the time to just go through it bit by bit with the captain. And some of it is as simple as English will be the language spoken on the bridge of the ship. So yeah, we go through that, and then the pilot, myself, any other pilot will assume control of the navigation of the ship, referred to as the con. And then we then, if the captain is in agreement, and the formalities, that's different on different ships. On some ships, it's very formal. The pilot has the con, and then they put it in their logbook. That being said, we're in charge of the navigation, but the captain retains command of the ship. So if for some reason he's not comfortable with what we're doing, he has the authority to take control back.
All right, so it's not just a friendly hello, okay, let's get this thing over the Columbia Bar and into the river. It's a detailed discussion, so the pilot knows everything that's going on with the ship. By the way, just an aside, the way the pilots get onto the ship, that is amazing. 4.5 years ago, I got to go out with them to see it for myself. They like to use their helicopter as much as possible because they feel it's safer than the other way to get onto the ship. With the helicopter, they rappel down. That other way involves timing the roll of the ship, then stepping onto an old-fashioned rope ladder and climbing up the side. Once they get aboard, they, not the ship's navigator, direct the ship in over the bar, and once they are safely past the Astoria Bridge, they hand the ship off to river pilots, who then take the ship farther upriver. I wondered if they ever find a ship in such rough shape that they don't trust it to come across the bar.
Yeah, there is. And yeah, sometimes it's if the captain says, yeah, we had trouble starting the engine, but we did this change and it's working now. And yeah, if you had trouble starting the engine, then yeah, we may say no, it's not safe. There is a formal process with the Coast Guard if we're not comfortable with any of the mechanics on board, and there's a whole Coast Guard list of things that we're required to report to them if we're aware of them. And then the Coast Guard then determines whether or not it's safe to bring the ship in. And if they need assistance, there are organizations called classification societies that the Coast Guard will defer to verify that it's safe.
Interesting. By the way, our expert there, Dan Jordan, he was a seafaring captain for 24 years before becoming a bar pilot. He's now been a pilot for about 18 years, and he's the guy I followed when I first did this story back in 2019. He's one of just 15 Columbia River bar pilots.
Should say one other part that we put into that is when we come into the river, we require the anchors to be ready and a crew member standing by them on the bow so they can let it go at any time. And that's the information we pass to the river pilot as well, as anchors are ready and somebody standing forward.
And it's obvious to you, but why do you do that?
Well, if you have a mechanical mishap en route, there are times when engines are lost, and lots of different reasons. Can be a mechanical reason, can be bad fuel, maybe water in the fuel. The nice thing about the Columbia River is most of it is sand, and if they run aground, there's no damage involved. You know, one thing that people don't think about too, most of these ships are diesel engines, but they're direct drive diesel. So it's not like not like your car where it's forward, neutral, and reverse. You actually have to stop to go from a head to a stern. You actually have to stop the engine and then restart it in the other direction.
Oh, that's fascinating. So that takes a lot more time. And if you have
takes more time, and to restart it, you have to be at a slow enough speed so the water pressure on the propeller doesn't hinder it.
Wow. So if you were in a Baltimore type situation, stopping or restarting and hitting full reverse is not as simple as it seems.
No, it isn't. In some ships, you need to be actually going less than about 6 knots in order to start it in the other direction.
So that's interesting. Keep all that in mind when you hear more about Baltimore. Dan's not talking to us specifically about Baltimore, by the way, because he doesn't really know much more about it than you and me. But I think that does give us an idea of why it would be so hard to get a ship going in reverse if its engine died, but maybe even then came back to life at the last minute. Dan says a couple of times a year a ship's engine will fail as it's coming in from the ocean. No disasters yet, but an engine failure is not heard of out there. But back to our bridges. While disaster has not struck and hopefully won't, the bar pilots are training for that possibility, and they're studying situations like Baltimore's to learn all they can.
So we do emergency ship handling training at a simulator in Seattle, which is driving a simulator toward the bridge and simulating that the engines have failed or that the rudder has failed. And what do you do? One thing we've been doing in that training for years, and luckily we haven't had to do it in reality, is to call 911 and have them stop traffic on the bridge. And we're reevaluating that process, trying to learn from what happened. Calling 911 on a cell phone might be more cumbersome to a pilot than calling on a radio and having the dispatcher call 911, which is what they did in Baltimore, so we learned from that.
And you guys, I think, have a dispatcher all the time at your office, right?
We do. Yeah, so I'm fairly sure we're gonna go that direction. Just notify the dispatcher and have them do all the conversation then.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the smart aleck in me wants me to ask you if you crashed, how many times you crashed into the bridge in the simulator?
Well, the nice thing is, unless we're messing with somebody in the simulator, you can stop the simulation before you crash into the bridge. But in a simulator, next thing you know, you could pop a dragon up on the bow of the ship.
All right, so a little bit of fun there at the very end, but this is a serious topic, and the Baltimore disaster shows us how fortunate we are to have these skilled bar pilots and river pilots and tug operators, all those folks, helping guide the massive ships around and keep our bridges safe. By the way, if you missed our special on the bar pilots at sea, check it out on the KGW YouTube page. A lot of people have loved it. It has over 3 million views.